second most significant piece of your revenue is your revenue sharing, which is made up of both your statutory, which is now called your EBIT portion, where you have to comply with the 3 different categories during the year in order to receive those payments from the state, as well as your constitutional portion. You can see that there was a strong decline that was occurring over the early years 2009 to 2011. Your revenue sharing has stabilized for the past 3 fiscal years and is increasing slightly. For example, the EBIT portion in 2013, the state's budget allowed for a 4.8% increase in that distribution to the communities. So we'll see what the budget entails for the next year. So if you were to look at this on a cumulative basis, however, over the past 15, 20 years, there would be substantial decline in total revenue from where you were in millions of dollars.
You may have heard on the radio or TV recently that the state was in surplus in terms of their budget. I think they said something in excess of $1 billion. So, I'm sorry?
1.3 billion.
1.3. And so everybody would like to get their hands on that. So the state's evaluating that right now to see, is there some combination of perhaps tax reductions, personal tax reductions, or some other way on the state shared revenue side for the communities that are complying with this EBIT to move more money back to the community. So to the extent that you have legislators up at the state who are advocating on behalf of the city of Taylor, I would certainly talk to those folks about the importance of trying to get some money back to the city of Taylor, because we've been shorted a number. Again, in our presentation in December, it's a significant number over the years that our state shared revenue has declined cumulatively. So to the extent that some of that can come back to the communities, that would be a little bit more useful.
Doug, at its highest point, what did we? I mean, just a ballpark guess of what would we have received in the early 2000s? I mean, would it 12 to 15 million dollar range?
I might even be able to find that number for you. Yeah. Why don't you go on and find it?
I'll keep going. We do have it with us, so we'll take a look for that number. Moving on to the expenditure side of the equation for the general fund. So again, this is excluding any interfund transfers because those can fluctuate from year to year. Same story applies with the building authority and the Act 179 moving out and permanently, at least consistently staying out for 2012 to 13. So that's, again, your decline from 2011 to 2012. So your total expenditures in 2012 were at $44.3 million. Now you're at $40.6 million. So what makes that up? Looking at public safety, you will see that that's a significant decline from $20.9 million to $18.1 million. I will give you the highlights. There are a lot of different parts, as Misty can attest to, that moved in that number. The overtime was down significantly for the fire department, so that was almost $400,000 of that. Last year, the city had an arbitration award that they had to pay out, and that was expensed in 2012. It was $750,000. That did not occur in 2013, so that's another reason why you see a decline. There was a lot of movement with personnel with regard to the SAFER grant, and so I won't bore you with the timeline, but there was a 10% pay cut that happened across the board, and with the timing of when the employees came back and that pay cut, it almost was a wash, really, as far as adding that cost in the 10%. So it was really related to a lot of those personnel issues, and then there were some other items as well, but the driving force behind that were those main factors. The other areas have stayed pretty consistent. If you look down, there's some small deviations, but nothing that's of great significance. The only other item I was going to mention is there were, with the TBA fund that we talked about, how that millage was moved to a separate fund. I know the Budget and Finance Department evaluated and made sure that the general fund allocations for what they cover of that fund were made proper. So that was a little bit of a change in that. But other than that, your expenditures were mainly in those areas. Before I move on,
In the year 2000-2001, the city received $10 million plus of state shared revenue compared to on Carrie's grant for 2014, 6.6. So
So so you guys kind of get a perspective of what we were using or utilizing as the number, you know, previous years, I mean, it's dropped significantly.
Millions. Cumulatively over 20 million.
Right.
Yeah, over, 25 million that we've lost.
And some of that adjustment just wasn't happening fast enough to the expense side, cutting the expense side out.
And you're projecting, the state does post projections, at the moment, so in total, you got 4.6 million in 2013, and they're estimating about 4.7 million in 2014, so slight increase of 100,000.
Now, that doesn't have any impact on what they may do with the surplus, though.
Correct, right, that's excluding that. So one,
I
yeah,
have a question.
Sure.
Going back to the previous slides. I'm just looking at the public works expenditures there, where, you know, from 2011 to 2012, well, then 12 and 13, but that's a huge decline of
Yeah.
$10 million. Did you explain that already? Did I miss that?
that was one of the millages, the rubbish millage.
Oh, okay.
That
That
moved
was
into its
moved.
own separate
Okay.
fund, yeah.
Thanks.
And I will
That
have
was
a
the
slide.
F-179 then?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. So when you take your revenues and expenses and compile them together, you come up with your change in your fund balance at the end of the year. And so this gives a very good perspective of where we've been over the past 4 years. So if you look back to 2012, you were in a total fund balance deficit of 1.9 million. Within that, there are different components that make up that fund balance number. So if you look at this portion that's below the line, these are your negative unassigned deficits that occur. So last year, that total was $5.4 million. This year, when you're looking at 2013, you can see we've gone from our deficit of 1.9 million in total to a positive fund balance of 960,000 in total. However, you still see that teal piece below the line. You still have an unassigned deficit this year of 2.3 million. So it's kind of a lot to wrap your head around, because we're going positive in total, we're decreasing our unassigned deficit, but we still have a deficit in our unassigned fund balance.
So with the unassigned deficit, what would that, is that like the pension funds that have been paid? Or?
So the reason that occurs is you have these pieces up here that we have to call out separately. So one portion of it is your non-spendable fund balance, and that is made up of your prepaid insurance, health insurance for July, which is about $1 million. And then there's also a long-term advance that occurred, that the general fund with the golf fund.
Mhm.
And that, under accounting standards, is not spendable because it's long-term and you have that liability there. So that has to be there as a positive number.
Okay.
Then there's also, in the past, there's been restricted special millages. There are not any this year. There's a little bit in that green, the lime green. You have a little bit restricted for grant money, because when that comes in, it has to be spent for that use. You can't spend that on other things. So you can't use it in your unassigned free spending, if you will, pot. So because those items exist, it then pushes your unassigned number. There's nothing left that's positive. And so it creates this unassigned deficit. So there's no one item that I can point to and say it's this, like X, Y, and Z liability that adds up to that number necessarily. It's just that your pot and the fund balance at the end of the year isn't large enough to offset the things that are non-spendable and restricted.
It's the cumulative difference really between your revenue and expenditures for the history of the general fund. So if you think about your checkbook, I kind of put it into that, where if you put a $1,000 deposit in, but you wrote checks for $1,200, you've got a $200 deficit there. That's really what this unassigned deficit is that cumulative difference over years and years. And that's the piece that the state pays attention to as well. If that number is negative, that's when the state comes to a community and says, okay, you've got an unassigned fund deficit, that's a trigger point. What are you doing about it, city? How are you going to manage through that? What's your process going to be? How are you going to get your revenues up or your expenditures down, or hopefully a combination of the two to get out of that deficit situation? And that's really the plan that's been filed with the state and modified on a year-to-year basis. That's really what that's addressing.
The biggest piece of that teal is the 1.75 loan to the golf course, correct?
It's up, right, up in this blue.
Yeah.
The positive piece, that non-spendable, correct.
Okay, so that's gonna kind of hold us down a little bit until we start making, chipping away at that, so to speak.
Right. And the near term, that's correct.
Okay.
And the near term likelihood of that happening would not be high.
Okay.
Because in effect, the golf course would have to be generating sufficient
Sure.
resources to start to pay back down on that loan.
Correct.
And in that amount, that magnitude, it's possible you could chip away at it, but I think it's gonna, realistically, it's gonna take a long time if it's able to happen at all.
And, well, no, and that 1.7 comes from years before
Yeah.
too,
Yes,
right?
right.
That's like
Yes.
05,
Right.
06,
Yeah.
07.
Yep.
That's not in the last 3 or 4 years.
Right, so that number has not gone up in the
No.
last 3 or 4 years. That's a cumulative amount that was there prior to that point in time.
Basically, a loan we just ain't been able to pay on.
Yeah.
That's right.
We're just happy, Tim, that it doesn't continue to increase.
Right, yeah, no,
Part of
I'm
that,
just
part of the
curious.
goal was just, slowing it,
Right.
so, we get the
Right.
cost
Well, I think
under
the good thing
control.
is that it's a loan through each other to where it's, we'll pay you when we can pay you.
And realistically, honestly, I mentioned this to Mr. Dowd as part of our meeting tonight. I'd be shocked if we had very many communities, if any, where the golf courses themselves are actually producing a profit. If you can get the golf courses to a point where they're self-sufficient and they can fund their capital and their debt, that's a pretty good operating golf course. It's just really not happening in our municipal base within Michigan. So I think as we talk about paying back that loan, we have to kind of keep that in mind. You could probably take that same comment and apply it to ice rinks as well. I don't know if we have any communities where ice rinks in total are covering all the costs to operate the ice rinks. So to me, those type of activities in some respects, have to kind of be lumped in with a lot of your park and rec activities. It's something that's there for the benefit of the community, and they may not be able to cover all their costs of